today
No,
among
I'm not,
humans
but
that
I'm
exist
not
right now.
assuming, dude, when I talk about this mutation suite thing, I'm not assuming common ancestry. I'm testing it. I'm taking a neutral
No, no,
position
no.
and looking.
See, this is how I know you're not listening, right? Because I wasn't accusing you
Okay.
of assuming common ancestry.
Okay.
That's not
So
what I was.
I'm sorry. What am I assuming? Like clearly.
Okay. The assumption is
Uh-huh.
the assumption is that when the young Earth creationist posits that there are different natural kinds created,
Uh-huh.
that they don't share one common ancestor, that entails that we will see different genetic makeup than we happen to see today, right? You brought up like dogs or something, right?
Oh, I see. So you're saying I'm assuming the commitments on your view, but you told me I was assuming things on my view, I thought. But I guess you're saying I'm assuming things what would be expected on your view. Is that correct?
You are assuming, right? You're assuming that in the young Earth creationist account, genetics have to make the same predictions that we would expect given a non-creational mechanism. But that's silly. Why would we expect a creational mechanism to act like a non-creational mechanism, right?
Well, let me
That's
tell you what
just
I'm assuming. I'm assuming that genetics works the same way, roughly speaking, as it does now as it did when God created Adam and Eve with
why.
their genomes.
Why?
So I asked you earlier, do you think that Adam and Eve reproduce differently and pass on genes differently? And I don't. I think you said no to that, right? If you want to say, well, look, we have no reason to believe that genes work the same way back then as they do now,
What's
fine, you
the
could say that.
what reason
But
do we have?
that's what ad hoc is, dude. You have
What
no reason
reason
to
do
think
we
it's
have
different.
to believe? What reason do we have to believe that the only relevant factor that we should consider is whether Adam and Eve reproduced the same way?
Well, this is just because it pertains to the inference I'm giving. But don't you realize that when you
And there
say,
are
look, we
other
have no
things that
reason to
pertain to
believe,
the inference you're making.
well, we can talk about the other inferences. I'm just talking about the shared
No, no, no.
mutations right now.
Bro,
Look,
you're not understanding my question. My question was, how do you know that that's the only thing that pertains? How do you know there aren't 100 things that you can't check that pertain?
are you like what? Can you give an
Yeah,
example?
exactly. You wouldn't
If you're
know.
just going to appeal to mystery, you're just appealing to ignorance, right? I don't take that to be like a quality of a good theory.
No,
Are you saying that there could be magical genetic fairies that come in and like rearrange it such that it looks like common ancestry? Okay, sure. Why would I believe that?
no, I don't need to. I don't need to stake the claim that there are certain entities, right? You're making the claim that this is a good theory, and that's contingent on knowing what the pertinent factors are. But as you're demonstrating right now, you don't have a good argument
Look, I'll tell you. I'll
that
tell
the
you what my
only
theory
pertinent
entails. Right.
factors
Look,
are the ones we can observe today.
I think it's reasonable to believe that Adam and Eve have genes, right? If your theory is true, it's reasonable for you to believe that. And I think it's reasonable to believe that recombination occurs and genes are passed on and mutations occur after the fall. I think that's reasonable. Okay. Now, if you say that's not reasonable, that it's wildly different than the way it is today, that's just what ad hoc is because you have no reason to
Why?
believe. You have no reason to believe that it's wildly different than it is today, other than to protect your denial of common ancestry. That's just what ad hoc means.
Why think that the factors you just listed are the only ones pertinent to whether common ancestry is a good theory or not?
The only ones pertinent to whether common ancestry is a good theory or not. Because there is no other way for shared mutations to occur other than, reproduction in the way that it's
Okay, so
supposed.
justify that claim.
Well, I mean, again, other than, right, like magical genetic fairies or some other like biological mechanism that like popped into out of existence for some reason. Sure, you could come up with a million crazy explanations, right? But all my point here is that all those explanations would be ad hoc because you have no independent reason to hold to them other than to protect your core, which is the
Yeah,
denial of
so
common
you're
ancestry.
getting ahead of yourself, right? You admit you're conceding that you don't actually have an argument
Wait, what?
that those are the only factors that are pertinent
Look,
to the question before us, right?
look,
And the way you try to write
this is
off
crazy, man.
that epistemic responsibility that you can't
Wait,
fulfill
like, look, what?
is by calling. Hold on, you got to let me finish, bro. Right.
I feel like I'm being
So
gaslit, man.
again, you are conceding. You are conceding that you don't have justification for the claim that this is the only pertinent factor involved.
Yeah, I can't.
And
I'm
the
not
only way
omniscient,
that you can,
obviously.
the, Right.
But do
The
you
only
agree?
way
Wait,
for
wait,
you
wait. When you
to.
appeal to these other pertinent things, do you agree that they're ad hoc when you say, well, look, my theory just depends on them?
No, what?
So
My
you're
theory
saying, look,
doesn't
look, look,
depend
look, look,
on.
look. What you're asking me is that, well, you concede me, right? I concede that there may be other relevant factors that I'm not aware about. Fine, that's a concession. I would never like deny that, right? But do you agree when you appeal to the set of things that I couldn't like imagine myself, right? That you are appealing to an ad hoc rescue device?
No, I don't think it's ad hoc to say a person who is making explanatory postulates about a situation which he normally has epistemic access through via his first person phenomenology on a topic to access to which he does not have via first person phenomenology. Right? I do
Look,
not think it's ad hoc to say, hey, maybe if you were walking into the barn like you normally do and telling me how many horses are there, that would be believable. But right now, you're pretending to say that you can close your eyes and imagine how many horses are in the barn. And why should I think that's a good way to know how many horses are in the barn?
look, this is confused, man. You have a theory that needs to explain the data, right? I think you agree by now that the things that we know occur is not sufficient to explain the data. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't think. I don't think the data can be explained.
Oh, the data can't be explained. Okay, so you don't have a theory. Is that correct?
Right. I apologize. I thought I made that clear.
Okay, so why would I take your view to be true if you don't have a theory or an explanation when my theory, right, is an explanation, is consistent with the greater theory of God existing?
Well, okay. So I mean, my approach to this, which may have been like somewhat previewed in the barn example, right, is just that Christians should be very quiet about this because I don't think we have the
Wait, but
epistemic
wait, you've been
means
arguing against
to
common
answer
ancestry
these
the whole time.
questions.
You haven't been quiet.
Well, yeah, knowing that a theory is
Wait,
bad
why is
isn't the
okay,
same thing as
why is it
knowing
bad?
well, as
This
we
is what
just
flat
saw, right,
earthers
it's
say.
based on
Look,
assumption.
refutation isn't replacement, is what they say. But you're not refuting my theory.
The refutation was that it's based on assumptions that can't be justified.
Okay, so because I can't go back in time to Adam and Eve, right, and know that there isn't some like other biological mechanism of which people reproduce and pass on their genes, that I can't say it's reasonable to believe in common ancestry. Why would anybody take that to be true or reasonable?
Because it is.
Okay, great. Thank you. Look, it's obvious that you just want to deny common ancestry, but you have no explanation for how it can be denied. So you appeal to these ad hoc alternatives that you have no independent reason to believe. And then you try to like play your agnostic, right? Well, look, I could just say the same things you're saying to the view of separately created kinds, right? I could just say the same thing to them. And then we would just be back to the drawing board again,
Look,
just evaluating the theories as we do in science or in
hold on,
general.
hold on. I actually agree with that, right? So, like, I'm not a defender of
Dude,
young Earth
when you came in
creationist
earlier,
science.
you
I
said it
think
was bunk. You said common ancestry was bunk or like bad.
no, brother, you're misunderstanding me. I'm saying I would criticize the young Earth creationist for the same reasons, right? I'm saying both approaches to the field make assumptions about the data that cannot be
And we
justified. We
agree the
don't
assumption
know.
here is that like sex works the way it does back then as it does today, right? Those are
No,
the assumptions.
no. The assumption is that sex, reproduction that we observe, and other things like it are the only pertinent factors. We don't
Like
know that.
what? Like what are the other possible pertinent factors?
They, in the very nature of the case, we can't answer that
Yeah,
question, right? We don't have an
when I
answer
make the
to.
inference that my wife drove home my, Mazda CX-5, 2021 Mazda CX-5, right? I can't rule out the alternative possibility that Michael Jordan did it. Therefore, it's not reasonable for me to infer or believe that my wife drove home my 2021 Mazda CX-5, right? Do you think that's like a reasonable like view?
No, I don't. I don't think
Okay,
that's
great. Then, oh,
analogous
how's
to.
it disanalogous?
Okay, because you have uh, first-person access to things like cars, Mazda models of cars. You have lots of familiarity with your wife. The reason you refer to Michael Jordan means that you have like some kind of historic knowledge of who that
Okay, let
is.
me make it analogous then,
Right.
or
So you got,
more analogous. Can we infer paternity or infer like guilt in a crime scene based on DNA?
yeah, I think so.
Great. Then, so you're saying that it's unreasonable to infer that this, suspect is a criminal, given that we found his DNA on the weapon, right? Because, well, maybe this person just has like unique biology such that we don't know about and could have, simulated what would have
Guys,
been
I'm
expected on
sorry.
the conventional view.
Give me 10 seconds, right? So, because I ran this with Jimmy as well about the crime scene stuff. Maybe, Jimmy, if you take like 30 seconds to explain your specific account on scientific anti-realist, your pragmatic view, that would shed a lot of light on what you're trying to explain, I think, for Tupac, I think. Go ahead.
Okay, I mean that might be a good suggestion, right? So I'll try to be really quick. The like historic problem we're running into is that I think human beings have a pretty good awareness of the available candidates for the various things to be explained in their observable world, right? So when we look at something like a crime scene, well, we've already met people. We know how something about their psychology because we've grown up with them and talked to them and all these sorts of things. And we know we have all these historical records of people doing bad things. Right? So in other words, like we're very familiar with the idea of crime. Um, but there's this question about like, hey, there's this God guy, and sometimes he does weird, miraculous, arguably irrepeatable things in history that have weird effects. We do not have the ability to observe those things now, and they're weird, right? They don't actually follow the normal rules of how things would work. So how would we be able to form predictions about what kind of data that stuff would leave behind? Well, we can't, right? Is the short answer. But the problem is
Yeah,
that
there
like
could be genetic fairies, right? Sure.
well, you can practice name calling about the possibilities here that we can't
Why would
uh,
we adhere to them if we have no
rule in
reason
or out of
to,
time.
right? Why would we say that they exist if we have no independent reasons?
So we have a reason to think that God
No,
exists
that's granted. God
and that
does
He created
exist
the
in this
world.
discussion. Why do we think that these unforeseen biological facts, right, existed?
Why do we think that these? It's not that we have a reason to think that they're there. It's that we have no ability to check how
Then,
He made
okay,
things.
so
So
just to be fair, that you're saying that common ancestry and young Earth or old Earth creationism, separate kinds, they're on a par.
yeah, I think they're both just kind of just so
Okay,
stories.
well,
We don't
oh
have
wait,
an
wait.
ability to
So is it a
really.
just a story when one makes a prediction that is like really risky and then ends up being true? Is that what a just a story is?
Yeah, I think like a just so story just means that you can replace the explanatory features, items, tools, whatever word we want to use for that, right? The same story that a common ancestry proponent is going to give can be replaced at no cost, right? That's all I think an ad hoc. That's what I take the ad hoc fallacy to be: is that we are preferring one explanation over another, and therefore mistreating the evidence as preferential when it's not.
Yeah, I agree with that. I gave you the cost in the case that the human comes down to fusion. There's no reason to believe that there would be a fusion there if special Earth creation is true, right? Separate creation. But we do have a reason. It's almost like entailed, like canonically entailed, that it would be there, right? If my view is true. Those aren't like that's a good reason, right?
I think we're going backwards. Like I think we can shake hands and disagree
No,
about that
I
and
think that
still be
you
friends.
understand here that like your theory is like really bad, right? But you want to play like this agnostic view. Um, that's fine, but
What when you say my theory, like what do you mean? I've been
well,
honest here that I don't.
I guess I think that you really think that that's separately created. That's what I mean by your theory, right? And I think you understand the problems with it, right? And that it's really unreasonable in light of we know. But you just want to like say, well, look, these unforeseen genetic fairies or biological processes, that we could never like know didn't exist. Skeptic brains and vats. Right, that's just crazy, right? And that's why I asked you about the Mazda being driven home by Michael Jordan. I asked you about like DNA paternity tests and crime scene stuff. You seem to like allow us to, you know, make fathers pay money for children, right? If paternity tests like point one way or another, and then put people in jail for life, even a death sentence, if DNA testing like points one way or another, right? Well, those are the same principles that I'm using here to rule out separately created kinds.
You have familiarity with how human beings carry out murders. I'm going to guess probably like you're a doctor, so like you probably have heard a lot of stories from other people that are some degree of reliability, right? About like how this,
Mhm.
and maybe you watch like what is it called, like 2020 or other shows. Maybe you had to do a history thing back when you were in school, and you wrote about this or that crime, right? So I think you're very familiar with how those things come about.
No,
You
I'm sorry, what
we can
things?
always like debate. We can always debate like
No, I'm sorry, what things come about?
like what the
Oh, what
huh?
things come about? I missed that.
I didn't. I don't think I said. But let me rephrase what I said because I don't even remember what I said that sounded like come about. But what I said was the fact that you are familiar with things like crime. Maybe I said like how murders come about. Maybe that's what I said or something like that. Right. I think you have a very good
Okay.
familiarity with that topic. Right.
Yeah.
You might not
And
be
I have a
as like
familiarity with how genes are passed down, how mutations occur too. Right.
ordinarily, right? Ordinarily.
Yeah, without genetic fairies. That's right.
Yeah.
All bets are
But
off with genetic
how do
fairies.
you right? But how do you know that the case of a creator acting is ordinary?
Yeah, dude, I will grant that it's metaphysically or even nomically possible that God suspends the laws of genetics, right, for some reason, right, such that
No.
looks look fine. Yeah, that's possible.
Why
But
are we
why? But
saying
why
it's
is
a
it
suspension?
reasonable? Why is it reasonable for somebody to believe that? That's my question.
Why is it reasonable to think that that's a candidate?
No, why is it reasonable to believe as if it's true? Obviously, it's a candidate. It's just a bad one.
All it needs to be is a candidate to be a problem for any other
Are
view,
you just
right?
saying that, like, if we hold to our theories, we have to have like epistemic certainty or something? That just seems to be unreasonable
No,
because you don't live your life that way, right?
I'm not saying that at all, right? I'm saying that in order for a theory to be evidenced, the evidence has to prefer that theory over the others, but
It
there's no evidence
does.
to prefer.
Look,
Well,
what theory? What theory though? Your theory is like these unexplained, unknown. You don't have a theory. You explain that you don't have a theory that could be like compared right now, right?
Jimmy, explain your anti-scientific realism and your specific pragmatic account, because that might really explain things, right? As to why you don't think the fairies is a better explanation than Tupac's. Why do? Go ahead.
okay, well, like the anti-realism itself is somewhat like orthogonal, but it is relevant, right? And so that the issue there is just that like I don't think um, something like our best scientific theories is a reason to think that scientific unobservables or like what you might call like theoretical entities exist, right? So in the case of
Well,
like
look, we can observe DNA karyotypes, right? In the case of the fusion, we look at that with our eyeballs, right? Those aren't unobservables. Like in the '80s when they did the banding patterns, we see those with our eyes, the way that you see your hands when you put them in front of you.
yeah, but we don't.
Scientific
So
anti-realism is irrelevant here when you already agree that paternity testing is like reliable.
I don't think it's relevant to the.
Of course it
I
is.
don't.
All because I told you my inference only relies
Hold on,
on
bro. Hold
genes
on.
being passed down and mutations occurring.
Tupac, let him explain, because trust me, because I did the whole "you don't live your life that way." What about you going to the doctor, or the CSI crime scene investigation? You know what I mean? Like, I've been through all of this with Jimmy, so please let him explain his version of anti-scientific realism, and I think it will dawn on you what's going on. Go ahead, Jimmy.
Look, if you want to like say that like scientific realism hinges on unobservables, well, that doesn't work here. If you want to say that it hinges on like not giving a proper history, well, I mean, then you're contradicting what you want to say about DNA, like paternity testing. That was the kind of view I was giving response.
I mean, I don't understand, like a person wouldn't even need to believe in DNA to think that a DNA paternity test would be good evidence, right? He just needs to think that there's certain correlations in the world between someone using a machine a certain way and the result of the machine. Like these, like of course, I myself happen to think that like DNA exists, but I'm just pointing out like the fact that you trust in a paternity test isn't any reason in and of itself to think that DNA exists. You need better evidence than that. But the issue, like the way that scientific entities are going to become involved is that we've never seen something that we would classify as speciation without already having motivation to classify biological entities
Okay.
according to a common
Sorry. This
ancestry.
this is the last time I interrupt. I'm sorry, but I think this is very important. So, Jimmy, explain to him, why do you think paternity tests are do work? In virtue of what do they work? Go ahead.
I don't understand the question.
Look, you believe in
Yeah.
DNA, you believe in sequencing, you believe in DNA tests. Why don't you believe in the inference I'm giving for common ancestry? Look, you're going to say there
I
could be
just don't
these
think they're
alternative
analogous.
biological facts at play here, right? In case of common ancestry, right? That like rectifies your view, or you're agnostic, whatever. But you don't hold that view for paternity testing or solving crimes.
Yeah, but I think I've been very so there's like a long list of uh, disanalogies that I could put out there, right? But the one that I've sort of focused on is that we have first person observation of things at least very closely related to DNA, and we definitely have first person observation of like reproduction and that sort of thing. But we don't have first person phenomenology of God creating things. So that's the disanalogy.
Okay, but he created us, and we have first person observations of reproductions, right? Reproduction and DNA and mutations. We're still God's creation, right? You're saying that God's creation is different back then than it is now, and you have no reason to believe that other than to protect your various separately created kinds. That's why it's ad hoc.
Oh, that's not true, right? So the I do think that like the textual evidence favors special
Yeah, I'm
creation.
sorry.
And
Yeah,
it
your
doesn't like
interpretation of the
it's not
Bible is the only reason. Sorry.
yeah, right. So if if my interpretation is true, then Genesis is going to favor special creation. That's to say, like God didn't use like pre-created ordinary means to cause things to come about. Then yeah, like seems like my disanalogy would have a reason.
Okay, great. Yeah, so this all hinges on the way that you feel the text means. Great. Okay.
It's not a matter of feeling, right? It's just a matter of the textual evidence.
I mean, I can't say that. That you're just going to favor one view, one interpretation over another. You're going to ignore all of the observations, all of the data, all the way we know that God's creation works, and just go like, well, look, the text, I favor this interpretation, so forget everything else. Fine.
I don't know. That strikes me as quite the most charitable interpretation of what you're saying is just to say
You
it's
already
unfair,
said that
right?
you have
Like
no
I'm not
theory, man. So
saying
what else could I take from this?
right. So like I said, right, the most charitable take on what you're saying is just to say it's a misrepresentation because I didn't say that I merely favor the text, right? I made the claim that the best interpretation of the text is special creation. You seem to be suggesting that like other interpretations are equally likely or more.
Yeah, I honestly don't know much about biblical
Well,
interpretation, but it seems like your
that's the
entire. I
problem.
mean, first off, but wait, didn't you say a second ago that you were agnostic about like special, like separate creation and common ancestry? Now it seems that you're saying, well, my interpretation is towards separate creation. So, like, are you agnostic or not?
Well, that God creates human beings and other things especially, which was the claim that was the terminology that I used,
Well,
is going to be open to some candidate like naturalization of that, right? So you could still believe in theistic evolution or something like that.
okay.
It's
Oh, wait,
just
wait. Do you think that like, do you have a view that We share a daddy with chimpanzees somewhere down the line, or are you agnostic?
I'm agnostic.
Okay, so then like what interpretation are you talking about? Interpretation towards what view? You should be agnostic about the biblical stuff because you said that you can't look at the empirical stuff, right? And if you are agnostic, then you should be agnostic about the interpretation of the biblical.
You're thinking that, yeah. So that when I said special creation, I wasn't making a comment about.
Uh-huh.
Uh, you keep using this phrase, and I'm sorry, I've lost it. It's like
Yeah,
separate
so like, sorry,
creation.
maybe I'll make that clear. So the idea that like dogs and cats are of separate kinds and they never shared a common ancestor.
I
I took
understood the concept, but I didn't. I keep forgetting the phrase you're using.
separately created kinds. I don't know, distinct
Separately
kinds.
created kinds. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, so I wasn't talking specifically about separately created kinds. I was saying special creation, which is just to say, like, God is depicted as doing an act
Yeah.
here that's historically unrepeated and isn't explained by some kind of non-God mechanism or something like that, right? So there's a matter of directness between the cause and effect, God being the cause, and then some effect in the world, right? And so that just
Y-
wouldn't be tracked. That wouldn't be tracked or
That's true on both
trackable by
views.
the natural science.
That's
That's
true on
exactly
theistic
my.
evolution, right?
That's
So
exactly my
what's the
point.
point of bringing it up? Special creation is assumed by both views.
That's exactly my point, right? It wouldn't
Okay.
favor one view over another.
Yeah, but what we're talking about is the empirics. Like, what? How are we explaining the diversity in our DNA? That's what's
The
meant to be explained.
Right. The point is that given that that is the most important causal variable, God's agency, and we have no way of drawing expectations from that causal variable, then we must be silent about exactly how it was
Yeah,
done.
well, your view, I mean, the other view that you're agnostic about, right, commits you to the idea that our biology was radically different back then than it is now. That we didn't pass on genes, we didn't have like gametes that like did, you know, uh, meiosis, right? Recombination didn't happen, mutations didn't happen. All those things have to be true on your theory or the other theory, right? And I just take that to be extremely unreasonable and ad hoc. Like you have no reason to think that other than to protect the separate creation theory.
That's just not true, right? So the motivation to be a skeptic about this is just to say, well, what are the major? Actually, I want to say two things, right? So I want to respond to that, and then I want to call back to something earlier that you said, but the motivation is to say, hey, the major causal players, the major explanatory candidates here are things like God, the original state of Eden, which was lost, and we don't actually know exactly what that means biologically, uh, and things like angels, right? So we know that there are like weird spiritual beings running around. They were particularly uh, active during this time, right? We got one angel coming up and interacting with them. We don't know all of what those causal powers would predict biologically,
Yeah. Yeah.
which
So
raises
Gabriel could
a
have like done genetics on us. They could have been the magical, genetic angels. Sure, that's possible.
well, well, adding the word magic doesn't
Look, they could be genetic angels.
is
That's your view. That's a possibility that I can't rule out. Right.
yeah,
Fine.
well, not yeah, more precisely, right? The serpent there, and perhaps angels in general, could have had some effect on human biology that we don't know, right? So
Yeah.
that's the reason to be skeptical about claims about what happened at that time in history, because the main causal factors are actually untrackable by the natural
And George
sciences.
Washington could have been
No,
trans.
hold on. As far as the text thing, Tupac, I'm not. This is not to like insult you or be demeaning or anything, but you said that you're not particularly familiar with the interpretation of Genesis, and I'm going to say like, well, that's your main problem, right? Is like you are neglecting the most important evidence historically about where we come from, and you are elevating things that are as clear as fog.
Oh, it's very clear, dude. I mean, look, you're appealing to genetic angels at this point. Like, come on. Like what? I mean, and again, that's just your interpretation. There are plenty of Christians that have the opposite interpretation.
It-
But you can't, and you
is it
can't, but you
reason
can't
to
even give
think
a
that?
theory to explain the data. But I can, where those Christians can. You have to appeal to genetic angels.
Okay, is it a reason to doubt a given interpretation of a text that other people disagree with it?
Well, I think it is. Well, it depends, right? It depends if those people are reasonable. They're giving, the reasons are good for doubting your interpretation. Sure, not just because there are other people that doubt your interpretation. Sure, but I think there are very smart people that hold the view that I hold, or the view that I think Christians should hold.
Yeah, there are smart
So, like,
people in virtually any camp on virtually any topic, right? So that just doesn't
look, I'm open to the
it just
idea
don't
that
seem
they
to
could be just
support.
totally confused or totally wrong. It's really ad hoc. It's really bad. It just doesn't work. I just don't have any reason to believe that.
No, that wasn't my point, right? My point was that like you were being dismissive about the textual claim on the grounds that people disagree with it. And my point is, okay, well, people disagree about whether the Holocaust happened. People disagree about the shape
Yeah,
of the
they
earth
could
and all
be,
other
those
types of
people could be
things.
like
Like,
Holocaust deniers. That's possible. I just don't think it's likely.
right, but again, like because you have neglected God's word on the topic, the testimony of your Creator on that topic, you're you're like leaving behind the best kind of evidence that you have for knowing something about our historic origins
Hmm.
to play in the dirt effectively.
Right. And that'd be a dispute you would have with a person who cares to do the interpreting, right? I'm not a Christian. I'm just trying to help you guys adopt a view that's like obviously true and not have to appeal to genetic angels, right?
I think that explains it, right? Like if you're not a Christian, that explains why you have a very hard time properly recognizing what is obvious
Look,
and
and the
what is not.
theistic evolutionist is going to say the same thing to you. Like,
I
who
was gonna
cares?
say that. Yeah, exactly.
Who
Yeah,
cares
they're
about that?
Christian. Go. Yeah, I was gonna say the exact same thing.
Like,
Go ahead.
there are Christians out there that like just like shake their heads or like, this is why people think we're idiots, right? Because of people that hold the young earth creationist view or the separate creatively kind view. Why are they wrong? I mean, you can't just say they're wrong because I haven't looked into it. It has nothing to do with what I think.
You missed my point, brother. Like all of the problem is that like your entire outlook and approach to this subject is not guided by a motivation in the knowledge of Christ as God and as Savior of mankind, and as the one who sends the Spirit to illuminate God's Word.
How is
Right?
that
You don't.
relevant?
You
Look, I'm just
don't
trying. All I'm trying to do here is give you a view that's consistent with what is obviously true, without appealing to ad hoc explanations.
view. My whole point is, if you're not a Christian, you're not in a position to know
That's
what's
just a
obviously
genetic.
true.
That's just a genetic fallacy. Who cares if I'm not a Christian? I'm just giving you the empirical data, and I'm telling you you should probably figure out how to square it with your theology.
Yeah, that just again, you're just missing the point, brother. Like in
Okay.
order to know what's obvious or not, you need to. If someone doesn't recognize Christianity as the most obvious thing in human experience, then they're hopeless to determine what's obvious
Okay. Why
elsewhere
would I believe that?
because it's true.
Okay. Great. Thanks.
Here comes the priest up.
Oh,
Here
okay.
comes the priest
Look. Oh,
up.
yeah. So the last time we talked, you like appealed to some kind of like I think acquaintance for properly basic beliefs or foundational knowledge, right? How do you know that acquaintance state is like veridical?
Like you're talking about acquaintance with
Yeah,
God.
to get out of the problem with the criterion, you like say that like you have this like undeniable self-authenticating acquaintance, right, with God existing or something, and knowing that he's like a truth teller. Like how do you how do you like battle all the skeptical challenges that like everybody else is subject to?
Well, I think that's a good question. If I was going to hammer down all of them, it would take a very long time. What's your favorite? Maybe we can just do one since I can't.
Yeah, look, like the way I see
I can't do
precepts
four.
like work, and I mean you presented it to me that way. You say that you're in some kind of epic like privileged epistemic position because you have this like non-inferential knowledge, right? That can't be denied and is certainly true, right? I'm just asking you like how you know that.
By being the recipient of
Okay,
it.
but again, so is it like a mental state? Is it like a emotion? Is it like just an apprehension? Like what is it?
Okay, well,
Look, I'm just going to give
maybe
Humer's
I can say like two
objection
things.
to the apprehensive foundationalism, by the way.
I'm sorry, say that one
I'm
more
just going
time.
to give Humer's objection to foundationalism that relies on acquaintance for properly basic beliefs, foundational beliefs.
Well, I don't think it's a foundationalism, but I mean, that's not really a big, I don't think that's going to like
Sure.
come up very much in this, my argument, but whatever. Like we could give like a big picture down view and then maybe make some more specific claims about what this knowledge is, right? So like the big picture view is just that like, say you take the language in Proverbs 1:7, right, where it says like fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And if you read that book, like the idea it repeats and cashes out there is like this covenant reliance or interaction with God, right? So that a person is experiencing God as someone to whom his devotion is due, someone whom he has to trust in all that he is, sort of like a motivational control factor that like all of my motivations are caught up in trusting in God and making decisions for or against him.
So you're saying you have a lot of these
Right. So the same way
commitments to
that like,
God, the God story, CT.
well, I'm saying that to answer your question earlier when you said like, what is this knowledge, right? The concept, the concept of this Christian knowledge, or like the item of knowledge that this Christian theory of knowledge is putting forward is that it's like this covenant relation with God. It's this idea that a person is in all of his mental states trusting in God in some sense and acting for or against him in all of his judgments.
Yeah,
But
no
How
if you
are
issue
we
with that.
supposed?
specific,
Hold up. How are we to adjudicate between these intuitions that are self-evident? These are properly basic beliefs. I think that's kind of the great pumpkin objection problem that Plantinga ran into. But look, so calling something, talking about incorrigibility or a non-inferential, properly basic beliefs. So, Jimmy, um, how would you adjudicate if somebody else has different um, seemings than yours that they also claim that are self-evident without question begging, of course?
Yeah, I don't get it. Like, why is the Christian justified in their predications and knowledge claims, but the atheist isn't, or any other theist, right?
well, I think it depends on what you're asking, right? If you're asking like how do I have justification for these negative beliefs about other religions and other claims and so forth at all, right? That is explained by the very knowledge I'm talking about, right? All I would need is to know God in virtue of his revelation
Yeah,
in
that's just
order to
externalism, though, right?
possess, hold
If God
on, in order
exists,
to,
then you have knowledge, sure.
yeah, I'm saying it's explained by the knowledge I'm talking about, right? Like in light of possessing this covenant fear of the Lord, one would know, right? One would easily recognize that trusting in something else that isn't this God is just going to be um, deleterious to one's
But
knowledge.
that's just
But
externalism. Look, if your story that the world is true, then you have knowledge. Great. Who
hold
cares?
on, hold on. Yeah, the other side to that question, though, right? Maybe what you mean, which isn't the same question, right? But maybe you mean like, how do you argue then about that knowledge that I claim to have, right? And there, like, I would think it's persuasively effective, at the very least, to just look at the distinctive claims that the person makes and see how those work out with his own uh, epistemic norm commitments and his goals epistemologically.
Do you mean like
Right?
do
Like,
a theory comparison?
You could call it theory
So to be
comparison.
clear, you don't have certainty, right, that God exists, right? You're just saying like, look, I just have a better theory that can justify or uh, like claim having knowledge or something.
No, I think I have certainty. I wasn't making the claim that Christianity is like a is like a explanatory hypothesis or something like that. What I'm saying is, if we're asking how we know that Christianity alone is true and nothing else, that's just explained by God revealing Himself to us, right? That's just
Yeah,
provided
but that's
for.
just again, that's just externalism. Look, obviously, if God exists and He tells you things and you know those things, who cares, right?
Yeah, and insofar as we are interested in arguing about that knowledge, right? Well, then we can just do a comparison of the two different worldviews involved, the two different, like, say, if we wanted to talk about, like, you brought up like problems of skepticism. Those are usually useful as a sort of like razor or standard by which to rule out faulty claims about knowledge. So, like,
Yeah, but like you're just bypassing it by giving the externalist justification. Why can't an atheist do that?
I don't, I don't understand what the significance of the question is, right? Like, why would it be? Why could the atheist do that?
Because they give a possible explanation for our noetic structures being
Who says
reliable,
it's
at least
possible?
somewhat. Well, it doesn't violate any gnomic laws, metaphysical or logical laws.
And how is that known?
How is that known? Just in virtue of what the modalities are.
No, the
How do you know that? How do you know that God doesn't violate logical laws?
he's
I could just ask
revealed
the
it.
same question to you.
It's been revealed.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. So now you're just back to your external critique, right? Or externalism, rather.
It's not an external critique. I'm just answering your question.
No, I mean, I'm sorry, it's not external critique, it's just externalism. Look, you're saying, look, I have these commitments to this story of the world, right? He revealed to us, that's how we know it, great. Atheists are gonna say we evolve, our minds evolve such that we know things, so we know things. Like, what's the symmetry breaker here?
Uh, well, evolutionary psychology has all kinds of problems with it, right? So one view has no problems, one view does.
Okay, yeah, so I agree that evolutionary psychology as a science, as an empirical science, has problems, right? But I'm not giving like a science, right? I'm giving a worldview which I pull from different commitments that I have. One of those being common ancestry, which obviously can accommodate what I'm trying to say here. It's not like I need to appeal to evolution and do like a science experiment to like predict that minds will be reliable. That's just not what I'm saying, and
Let
it's not what
me
evolutionary theory does.
let me rephrase, right? So, like, naturalism, in particular, evolutionary naturalism, is
Mhm.
going to be problematic with its epistemologies, right? So that's
Why?
all I have to do to point out that the modal claim has been unjustified. The
Wait, why?
modal claim
What's the
that
problem?
it's possible, well, just to be clear, right? The claim that it's possible for non-Christians like atheists to stand on the same externalist story, if you want to call it that, that claim needs to be justified by an explicit account of one's own knowledge, right? In other words, the way that you would know that modal claim is by actually possessing knowledge of an epistemic theory contrary to the Christian one, right? So
So
if
what
you're
do you
going to
mean an
say,
explicit? I'm sorry, you said explicit theory, explicit explanation. What do you mean by that?
I just mean a theory like
A reason?
knowledge consists of like true justified belief, and the way I come to possess true justified belief involves some kind of story about how I'm an animal in a mechanistic world that slowly develops consciousness, and I have all these experiences, and from those, like, my mind is caused to develop concepts or something like that. But I'm giving a very like
Skeptic,
rough
sure.
summary of some kind of
So like, why is
empiricism.
something like that impossible? It's not empiricism. It's just like a historical account. Like it's a story. Like you want to give a story that God created our minds in a way that they track the world or something. So why is my story impossible or less likely true?
That's impossible because there's, like, for example, uh, if something like evolutionary psychology is true, and here I don't mean like
Not the
the
science,
specific
sure.
subset of
Yeah, yeah.
psychology that postulates
You mean
evolutionary models or
you mean
something.
minds evolving properly, right?
Yeah, I just mean like the story that mind is an evolutionary reality. That like the
Yeah, sure.
biological story of evolution is what explains the existence of minds, or something like that.
Right. Yeah, I got you.
Right? It's just a particular take on naturalism. Right? I could just go to naturalism and say, okay, well the problem there is just that like uh, the laws and phenomena and so forth of naturalism do not provide any reason to trust our cognitive faculties.
Okay, well, you gave the sketch of my story, right? And maybe I'll make it a little bit more clear. I think that our minds are adaptations meant to simulate the world such that we can navigate the world and reproduce, right? And by simulating the world, I just mean like representing the world as it is, like at least to some degree of reliability. So, like, why is that like not likely to be true?
Well, there's nothing about the physical description and behaviors that you listed that would make it likely to be true. There's no reason to think that creatures would evolve that would have representational minds.
Well, because it's adaptive. If our minds didn't represent like the fact that there was a cliff in front of me, I wouldn't exist, right? Or like the my precursors, like the like early animals, they wouldn't exist anymore. Why is that not an explanation?
You're just saying, you're just saying that uh, if these creatures do exist, then this story is compatible with them prima facie. Okay, but
This,
the idea is that you can provide
yeah.
a reason why they would exist before they're there, not after.
Why would they exist before they're there, not after? What do
No,
you mean? Are you saying that I need to like have a
reasons are
look? I'm not
they?
doing science here. I'm just giving a story of the
What
world,
reasons
right?
are there
Based on the
for
human
them to
understanding.
come into existence?
Oh, what reasons are there for minds that work properly to come into
Yeah.
existence? Well, because minds are adaptive, right? Minds that have qualitative
What
states are
reasons
better
are there for
suited to navigate the world.
adaptiveness to need to come into existence?
Well, because of the way that things evolve. If they don't, or if they're not adapted, they don't exist anymore. What do you
Why
mean?
do things need to exist in order to be adaptive?
No, they need to be adaptive in order to exist. You got it backwards,
Right. So if they
right?
exist, we can expect them to be adaptive, but that's not a reason to think that they would exist in a universe that doesn't already have them. Right. So
Could you say it
presumably you
again?
think,
I didn't track that.
yeah. Let me put it this way, right? Presumably you think that there are animals that don't have anything like human consciousness. Like maybe I kind of doubt that you think a
Right.
clump of grass in my front yard
Yeah,
has some kind of.
I think fish may not have qualitative states, at least the way that we do. I can
Okay,
give
there
reasons
you
for
go.
that.
Right. So there's all kinds of life that doesn't need any kind of
Yep.
uh, mind-like representation. And
Oh, I
furthermore,
see. Okay, I got you. I know the answer. I
on
know
your
the question I'm
story
asking
of
you.
the universe, there was a time when none of these things existed anyways. So
Yep.
why, given those physical laws, would we ever expect minds in the first place?
Gotcha, gotcha. Because qualitative experiences, not just cognition, minds like chasing some prey or something like that, are adaptive. Okay. And the story that I give is, which is a theory, it's really interesting. It can't be proven, right? But it's a part of my commitment. It's like, just like anybody else's theories. Is going to be that fish, right, either have no qualitative states or had like very like base ones, like very simple ones, right? The reason for that is because they only need to like exist by like reacting very quickly, chase something, and then not like plan or really simulate the world in the way that we can. When those fish evolved and they came out into the world, right, there was predator-prey relations such that having those qualitative states helped them simulate the world, right, and were adaptive. Now, some evidence for that, right, comes from something called blind sight. Blind sight is a condition that some people have after strokes, right? They can navigate like rooms, like obstacle courses, but they have no qualitative states, right? They don't know that there's like an obstacle in front of them, yet they're able to navigate around it. But the problem is that they do it very slowly and very clumsily, but they can still do it without the quality of states. Seems to me that if they had the quality of states, they could like, do kick flips over those obstacles, right? And that just seems to be adaptive. And I think that's probably what happened at the level of fish when they evolved out of the water. No, that seems to be like perfectly possible. I can't like give a ton of independent reasons for believing it, right? But I never said that my theory needs to have like scientific, testable, falsifiable data for it to be true. It just needs to be plausible. And but you're saying it's impossible. So like, why would something like that be impossible?
But again, right? So the issue is in order to know that the theory is possible, you have to have justification, right? And in order to have that justification, you need to know something about what constitutes good justification, why this theory is better than another, which involves criteria for that sort of thing. And so you
So,
need to have at least some kind of base form of
but by
idea.
possible, I just mean it doesn't violate a law, a gnomic law, metaphysical law, a logical law. That's all I mean by possible. Do you mean
That's a
something
lot
different?
of knowledge you're claiming to have. But like, regardless,
Well,
yeah,
I'm just telling you what I'm just telling you what I mean. What do you have a different idea of what possible is?
no, that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly fine. I just think that's a
Okay,
lot of
great. So then
knowledge.
why can't I use, so if we agree on what possible means, then why can't I use that to say that this view is possible, given it doesn't violate a law?
Again, follow me, right? In order to know that that view is possible, right? You need to know, like you just said, right, something about the nature of possibility, whether that's like things like metaphysical laws that determine what's possible and what's not. Things like you might even think that like you might even be like a physicalist and think that like there's physical laws that you would need to know determine that sort of thing, whatever, right? But in any case, like you're going to need to understand that any view that entails that it's impossible is false, right? And that's going to be an infinite list of worldviews that just entail the impossibility of something like evolutionary naturalism, or really
Look, there
like
may be something about my
naturalism in general.
view or something about my view that like entailment that would make it impossible that I don't perceive, sure, but that's true of all views, including yours. So like, why
You're
do you have
missing.
this privileged access to what's possible and impossible, but I don't have it?
You're missing. I don't think you understood what I just said, right? What I said was that there are all these things that you would need to know. This is the gist of what I'm saying, right? There are all these things that you need to know in order to possess justification for the claim that the view in question is possible. Knowing those things requires knowing, at least in some basic way, a theory of knowledge. Okay. In other words, in order to know that the view is possible, you need to know that it's actual. You need to know that it's true in order to know that it's possible.
No, no, I
Okay.
don't. But possible doesn't mean it's true. Possible means that it could be true.
That, that wasn't my argument.
Oh, what? Okay, so all you're doing is saying, look, I can't have like these modal semantics. I can't know what possible means. Okay, why is that?
No, the claim is that in order to know those things, you need to know these more general claims about like what knowledge is, right? If I don't know what knowledge is, then then what justification would I have for the claim that I know it's possible that this view is true?
Okay, well, I have theories of knowledge. What's the problem? Why can't an atheist
That's
have a theory of
exactly my
knowledge?
point. When you say I have theories of knowledge, what that means is, hey, my theory of knowledge is true, therefore it explains the justification that I have for the modal
No,
claim.
no. It would be
Great.
my theory explains the data, therefore it could be true, right? Why can't an atheist have a true theory?
Okay, in order to know that it's possible for it to explain the data, again, you would just need to know all these other general laws in virtue of which it is possible. And in doing any of that, you would need to know what knowledge is. And in doing that, you would need to know a theory of knowledge. There's
Okay,
no way to have
why can't an
justification.
atheist in principle know what knowledge is?
We're covering that right now, right? So you're saying what makes it possible. You've made the claim. It's
Mhm.
possible that atheists can take a stance that's similar to Christians in some kind of externalism.
Yeah,
Okay.
and by possible, I
How
just
does
mean
Tupac,
being in or
bro,
in
bro, you gotta let me finish,
but
bro.
look, I mean, I'm asking you clear questions, man. I'm kind of just hearing like a bunch of meandering and bloviation. I'm sorry. Look, why can't an atheist have a theory of knowledge that may be correct or is correct? Why can an atheist use modal semantics? That's a clear question there.
I don't. Well, I think I've made maybe like 60% of the way to, perhaps like more like 75% of the way to giving an outline of that. Right. In order to know that, you would need to know a theory of knowledge.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, the theories of knowledge that you put forward to justify the claim that it's possible is a problematized theory. When we
Great.
went
So
to the
what's
theory, we saw that there's no reason why a physical universe with these various physical phenomena prefers the existence of minds in the first
wait?
place,
I told
much
you why
less,
there'd be.
much
What?
less, much less minds that have the kind of internal representationality that humans
I
have.
gave you a reason why. Did you want to respond to that? I talked about blind sight and my theory of fish,
Though,
right? Developing qualitative states such that they can simulate and navigate the world better in the evolutionary arms race.
okay, the
That's a
problem is,
reason. Why is that false?
yeah, I'll address that, right? So the problem with that is that that is a reason why there might be particular adaptations, given that a certain kind of consciousness in general already exists. But the question that I've put to you is, why would consciousness of this variety in general be expected in the first place if there are just things like physical laws and the other kind of physical atomic things that you think are explaining the phenomena of the universe, right?
Oh, I
And
see what you're saying.
furthermore,
Okay, great. Yeah. Yeah, this is just, I mean, I'll just respond like Malpass does with his black stalking horse, right? Look, when you say theism, right, you can't just say God and then just assume all the things that you think are true under Christianity, right? You have these baked in assumptions about how this God's going to act. I'm just saying we just live in the world, right, where our minds happen to evolve, right? I don't have to say naturalism by itself. Bare naturalism makes these predictions. Obviously, it doesn't, the same way that bare theism doesn't make these predictions, right?
I don't see how you could avoid giving a
We're both
story
giving just
about.
those stories here. We have to use theoretical virtues to adjudicate which one's true. It's not like we can say we can derive all these facts from just naturalism or theism simpliciter. Obviously.
No, but my friend, that's not the objection, right? The objection is part of having a reason to believe this form of naturalism is having an account of cognition, of having an account of a certain variety of consciousness,
Okay, now you're
because
moving to our
that's what.
theories of mind. What, do you want to talk about that now? I mean, you haven't defended your theory at all here. All you said is that I can't have knowledge.
I
And you're
think
just like
Jimmy's
you're
moving
just jumping
towards.
around. Sorry, go ahead.
I think Jimmy's going towards the problem of criterion and pointing
I
out on
already brought
his
that up,
view.
man. And I asked him why he can avoid that. And he just says because my theory is true, which seems to be just an externalist justification. Now he's just questioning my mechanisms in my externalist
I
justification.
think he's about to explain why you couldn't have a solid theory of knowledge by explaining um, the problem of by running the problem of criterion, right, Jimmy? Or was I not tracking? I'm half asleep, but
Look, if you can tell
that's
me
what.
why you are able to get out of the problem criterion and I'm not, then I'd be happy to hear it. I'll be a Christian, right?
Go ahead.
Well,
That's the first
I
thing I
don't know if
asked
that's
you.
true, but
That's
let's
the first
well
thing I
let's
asked
let's
you
move
earlier.
forward. Yeah, but this is look. I'm not trying to be rude, but we're not going to have a fruitful conversation if every time I try to respond, I get interrupted halfway through. So I'm down to talk about that topic or any other, but like, can we agree to be fruitful
Look,
here and respectful and
I'm
not
dude.
interrupt each
I
other as much
don't
as
think that
possible?
you're like answering my questions. I think you're just jumping around. I don't think that you're being like on level with me right now. That's why I keep interrupting you to keep it linear, right? I gave you an externalist justification for how minds could be adapted to stimulate the world, which is what's going to be a noetic structure that's reliable, right? You said I had no reason. I gave a reason. You didn't respond. Now it seems like you're jumping to like philosophy of mind or something like that. Maybe why physicalism can't be true.
Yeah, I just don't agree with the characterization that I've jumped around or really
That's fine.
moved
Look,
my
how's it?
life.
How's
Like,
what's your philosophy of mind?
here's another example where I can't
What's
get
your
out a
view of mind, man?
sentence.
What's your view of mind?
So I probably like um, the closest like I don't what's the word for this? The position that like might be a useful foil for understanding what I think about mind is like um, neutral monism or something like that.
Okay. So, like, why is neutral monism not available to the atheist?
I don't think that the atheist has a metaphysic that accounts for minds at all.
What do you mean? Neutral monism just says that, like, right, there's like a substance base that isn't purely physical or mental, but like these things that we call physical and mental are like emergent properties of it or outgrowths of it or something. I mean, that seems perfectly consistent with naturalism or atheism, right? It's a foil to physicalism, to use your terminology, but I mean, a lot of Dan Linford, who's like a physical, like a physics guy, right? He's a neutral monist. I mean, he's got a PhD. Thinks about this shit all the time.
Yeah, I'm aware that there are atheist neutral monists. I think probably the majority of neutral monists are atheists. Oh
Okay,
no,
so
that's
what's
not
the
true.
problem?
They're probably like Hindus or something. But like, it doesn't really matter. The point is like you're asking, okay, why is that incompatible with naturalism? Okay, well, we just discussed that, right? Like on naturalism, there's no reason to believe that minds exist. There's no reason to expect minds. There's no reason to account for the historical occurrence of knowledge in terms of merely natural entities. So that's just to say, like, your metaphysical account is explanatorily null. It doesn't do its
Wait.
job.
Wait, do you think human minds are the same thing as God minds, or that they are similar in any way other than analogic predication?
I mean, sort of. I think that human minds sort of like give someone an idea what God is like.
Okay, well, well, I'm talking about human mind versus God mind. Is there any univocal predication between those two?
No.
Okay, great. So then your theory of a God mind doesn't give any reason to believe that human minds exist, does it? Given that they're not the same thing at all, they're categorically different on your own view.
What would be the lack of expectation, right? If I have a
Well,
God.
when you put Christian theology in, okay, of course, right? Human minds are expected, right? But that's just baking in all this extra stuff. Why can't I bake in extra stuff on my view of naturalism?
I honestly don't know what that means, right? So the view I'm defending is Christianity. On Christianity, the metaphysical
Yeah, and
account is that.
I'm not defending naturalism, any form of naturalism. I'm defending naturalism that I put on the table,
That's
right?
fine. I didn't misrepresent your naturalism as far as I know.
Yeah, but you said that naturalism doesn't predict it. Well, you're saying yours does because you have commitments to Christian theology. Well, mine predicts in like a non-technical way, because Tupac 420's naturalism, right, says that minds evolved, just like your theory says that God creates minds.
Yeah, but isn't that an empirical claim about the universe?
No, well, I mean,
Presumably,
I use empirical data to like inform my theory, but like, I mean, I'm doing theory comparison. I'm just saying which theory makes more sense based on the things that I have commitments to.
yeah. So that's the difference, right? Is that like the reason why I believe, you know, I mean, everything is created by God on Christianity, right? But the reason why I believe minds and therefore knowledge is accounted for in terms of God's creation is because He has revealed Himself and then verbally spoken in
Uh-huh.
His creation scriptures
But
and
that's not an
testified to them.
expectation on theism.
And
That's an
that's not.
expectation
Hold
on
on,
Christian theology.
hold on. You got to hold on. That's not the same account of knowledge that you have, right? On your knowledge,
Oh, okay.
you postulate that human beings are
Hmm.
uh, evolved in this
Evolved
way,
properly.
right?
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
do you postulate that the biblical text is true?
I think postulate is the wrong word, but sure, it's
Okay, so
a
how do you know it's true?
scientific
Like,
postulate.
like, do you not do a theory comparison? Do you not say, like, look, I've looked at this Bible and I think it's more likely true than not? Do you not like interpret these things from your
It's
mind?
not a theory, right? That's the difference. Is that like you start
But
without an
by
A.
theory, I just mean how the world is. I'm not saying scientific theory.
No. Listen. On your epistemology, you start without knowledge of what the world's really like. And then via empirics, you begin to form
No,
postulation and use
no.
abductive reasoning to
Why would I
understand what
be
the world's
committed to
like.
empiricism? Why can't I just use a priori reasoning like you do?
I don't know how you would. How would you use that?
Why not? Because our because the way that our minds function, right, are going to let us know mathematical truths, are going to let us to make predictions, like know things that like it's impossible for something blue all over to also be green all over. Why is that something that can't evolve?
Oh, I thought that, okay, so you were giving like an evolutionary account. It's normally thought that like evolution is not known a priori. That's a very interesting view. I mean, you can say that. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're going to say that evolution is known
I'm
a
not saying that. I'm
priori,
saying that I use all kinds of different ways. I have all kinds of different ways of obtaining knowledge and how I form my commitments to how do I think the world is. It's not just
okay,
empiricism.
I
Like
didn't,
I didn't look at a scientific study to know I have hands. I mean, I guess that's
I didn't say
empiricism
that you
anyway, but I
did.
didn't.
I didn't say that you did, right? What I said was you start out without having some kind of basic access to the way the world is like, such
Wait. Why would I
as
not have that? Of course I
such
do.
such as with respect to the evolutionary account of the human mind coming into
Well, that
existence,
part
for
is
example.
empirical, sure, but why wouldn't I have access to the way
There
the
you
world
go.
is?
Well, that's a justificatory regress problem, right? Like if you didn't know the very thing that you need to know in order to trust in your cognitive faculties, then how in the world are you going to
Oh, wow.
postulate
Okay,
things about
great.
the.
So, did you know that Christian theology was true before you became a Christian or learned about Christian
Yeah,
theology?
everybody knows God.
Okay, yeah, but did you discover that after the fact you affirmed Christian theology?
No, it's not discovered, right? It's revealed. It's known as soon as you're
Okay,
born,
right. Look,
as soon as you're
all you're
conceived.
saying here, look, all you're doing is being like, oh, well, look, I see this theory and I always knew, right? That's just a part of your theory. You've adopted that theory, right? Christian theology, right? Before you had it in mind, right? So you weren't justified to even adopt the theory based on your own and on your own lights. That's how
You're gonna
absurd
have
these
to.
skeptical questions are. Look, you're trying to say, look, I can't be justified in saying I have hands because I didn't know about my evolutionary theory,
Yeah, for
right?
all you know,
A
it's
priori or something.
systematically deceiving. You'd have no idea.
Yeah, it's that you too, right? You could be systematically deceived. This Bible could be false, right? You could be ignorant of that. What's
Why,
stopping that from
why would that
happening?
be possible?
Well, it would be possible because there's no contradiction. The same way it would be possible in my view. Look, you're just all you're doing is filtering what you learned from the Bible and from Sunday school into your, background commitments and saying it's true.
Tupac,
How's that any different than what I'm doing?
Tupac. The different. Okay, there's two differences here. One is you. I said I was very fair and honest. Right. I said somebody could come along and stake the claim. I think we all recognize, like, wow, that's crazy if they really believe that. But I guess if I had to argue with someone, you'd have to use different arguments, right? I think we all know that. But regardless, like, somebody could come along and try to make the claim that evolutionary naturalism is like psychologically basic, that it's a priori known, et cetera, et cetera. I said an atheist could make that move. And in a certain sense, there are atheists in history who have done something very much like that. But that's not the point of view that Tupac evolutionism, or excuse me,
Hmm.
Tupac naturalism comes
I
from, right?
understand what you're saying,
So
man.
so I honestly made that comment, and then you honestly conceded, no, 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 this is empirical, this is a
Yeah, yeah.
postulation.
I'm
We
questioning whether or
came to
not
know
you
this.
know Christian
Hold on,
theology a priori, man.
hold on. You gotta listen. I'm giving a recount of the dialogue. Okay, so I made that comment, and then you clarified your view is that you start from a state of ignorance about the very causal mechanisms that bring about your own cognitive faculties. Okay, you
Hmm.
start without knowledge about whether or not those actually have your best at heart.
That's right.
Okay?
As you.
That is a really big difference
Well, wait,
between
wait. How do you
Christianity and
know?
worldview.
How do you know you had the knowledge of
Hold on, hold
Christianity?
on. I'm almost done. That's a really big difference. It's a really big difference when one view says, I go from being ignorant about things that aren't intentional, aren't persons, have no emotional commitment about me, et cetera, and then I make postulations about them being amenable to my cognitive states. That's very different from a view that says, hey, here's this caring God that created all human beings in his image. He's always good to them. He's always looking out for them, right? That's a very different view.
Okay, look. Oh my
Secondly,
gosh,
I'm
dude.
almost done. Secondly, okay, on your own view, things like insanity exist. Things like cognitive errors exist. Things like fallacy. The causal mechanism for all of those is exactly the same one that brought about the knowledge putative in the
Uh-huh.
first place. That's the
Uh-huh.
problem. So not only does your view have no reason to think that this
Oh my
causal
gosh.
mechanism is reliable, but you also have counterexamples to its reliability.
Oh my gosh, there's so much to be said here, dude. Look, I want to like hear a principal difference between what you're doing when you affirm Christian theology and what I'm doing when I affirm this
I just
view of
gave it.
naturalism. Look. All you're doing is saying, well, these views are different. We have a God that wants us to be, have reliable minds. Well, you have a view where there's no God to want you to have reliable minds, right? But you're trying to say that I'm unjustified at some level because I need to, like, I don't like have the knowledge of my worldview like a priori. But my point here is that neither do you. Nobody does. You come out into this world, right? You just see the world as it is. You take it for granted, right? And then you take sense data in. You think about the way the world is, and you make a decision. Right now, your decision includes a worldview and external justification that includes the idea that, well, you always knew that in the first place, right? But that's just to assume that your worldview is true, right? You don't have any further justification than I do. Because look,
I
if
mean,
look,
that's,
in other words, if your view is true, you have minds at work. If my view is true, I have minds at work.
but you don't have, we could even grant, I don't think that's true, but we could even grant that. It would still not entail that the minds know they work. Then that is a big
Oh my
difference
God.
in
So,
and of
so how
itself.
did you? how did you achieve the KK principle? How do you know you know?
It's provided by revelation.
Okay, well, how do you know that's true?
Like if I say X is a sufficient condition of Y, and then you say, okay, what are the conditions for Y? I don't understand what the question is, right? Because I've already answered that.
Look, when you peel a revelation, that's foundationalism. That's not knowing you know, because it's always possible, right? There's no logical contradiction or metaphysical one that you're just misapprehended that belief. Like that belief is false.
I think it would
Why
be.
should you believe you're certain?
I think it would be a knockdown criticism of Christianity if you could give an account of knowledge by which you know it's possible and not, and then say, well, therefore, in virtue of this knowledge I acquired,
Oh my God.
I know that it's always possible for God to have failed. But that's the very thing that's in dispute. Knowing what's possible is the very thing that's in dispute. You need to know what's actually the case, at least some things about the world, like how the mind works, how knowledge works, and so forth, in order to know what's possible.
Okay. All right.
And the
So
problem is, my friend, that
why doesn't the
when we
atheist,
look
if
at our
atheism is
different
true, why
when we
don't they
look
have
at our
knowledge? Is the first question I'm
when we
asking.
look at our when we look at our different claims about how we know what's possible, on your view, there's no reason to believe anything. We do not have knowledge,
Oh my
okay? Because
gosh,
we are
that's just a
subject to.
crazy thing to say. Look, all you're doing is the dark Dawkins
Why?
thing. You have this implicit principle that if you don't know how the world began, then you don't have knowledge. Well, look, you had knowledge before you knew how the world began on your own view.
That's just.
And why would I? And even if I agree that you knew that had that principle when you came into like you like knew what Christian theology was somehow a priori, why would I agree with that principle that you need to know like the fundamental nature of the world to know that there's like an apple on the table? Why would anybody agree with that? Is there a single epistemologist out there that agrees to some like crazy view like that?
You are welcome. Epistemologists on this topic of like what knowledge is required to be rational at all don't simply shrug and ask, why do you need to believe the KK principle? There's a lot of debates about it, or at least something like the K.
Yeah,
You don't
you know,
actually.
people that hold to
There's.
the KK principle are skeptics. You know that, right? That's why like 98% of epistemologists are infallibilists. You don't have to affirm the KK principle to have knowledge. Look, if you
There's
think
like
that you
there's like
need,
two
look, do
problems
you?
with that claim.
Here's a question. Here's a reductio. Do you think that you need to know that you know to have knowledge?
Yes,
Do you think that's like a constituent part of knowledge?
of course. I don't think that
Okay,
like
great. So
if you're
okay, so
talking about like hold on, if you're talking about like knowledge as any kind of knowledge, just knowledge intrinsically, then no, I don't think you need to know for any instance of knowledge. But yeah, I do think you need to have some cases of the
okay,
KK principle
great.
in order
Do
to
I
have
know?
knowledge.
Do I know that I have hands or that like it's daytime before like I affirm Christianity?
Before you know Christianity, but before you affirm it.
Affirm it.
Yeah, I think you know those things before you affirm it.
Okay. And is it because like I have certainty about like it being daytime or that I have hands? Right. I could be wrong, right? I could be a schizo
Yeah,
and
I
I
don't.
could
I
be wearing
don't.
a VR headset.
I doubt that you could have certainty about those things.
Okay, great. So why okay. So then why how do you have certainty on your view? If you know that illusions, schizophrenia exists, if you know that like people can be deceived in certain ways from drugs, like how do you know that reference?
We're coming back full circle because I'm going to give you the answer in just a second. But we're coming back full circle, right? Because I've answered this question several times. There's 1,000 different ways to put it. I could say, because God told me. I could say, God's revealed it. I could say, well, that's uh, essential to the Christian worldview. There's 1,000 ways to say the same thing, right? But you're
But
just
that's just the
asking the same
externalist.
question.
That's the externalist response. We're talking about internalism with the KK principle, right?
I don't know what that means.
Yeah, the KK principle is a challenge to the internalists who can give reasons how they know, right? The externalist just says, well, look, we can't know we know, right? But like if the world is the way we think it is, then we do know, right?
Okay, if you define externalism as the claim that the KK principle is false or something like that, then I just wouldn't count as an externalist.
Well, it's a part of it,
If you're
but you're giving the
asking,
externalist responses. I have to go, but just say what you're going to say, and I'll just leave.
no, that's cool, man. We can
Yeah,
pick it
when
up later.
you say you know that you know because you have revelation, that's an externalist reply.
I don't, but that's what I'm saying. I don't know, like I don't understand what you think you're conveying by that sentence that is significant.
That
Like
look, you're
it's
saying,
just
look,
false.
if my story of the world is true, then I have knowledge. That's just trivial. That's the externalist reply. That's the like main arguments against
No,
fundamental
that's not. But that's not what I'm
justification.
saying. I'm not delivering to you a hypothetical, right? If somebody asks like, "Where's the bathroom?" and somebody points in a direction, nobody interprets that as meaning, okay, if the bathroom is over there, then I would be pointing to it right now.
I mean, they don't have to. They're not going to go through that, but it's obviously true that like your direction is correct if the bathroom's
Same
over
with
there where you're pointing.
Christianity.
Yeah, and that's why your replies are externalist. I have to. My wife just called for me. I'm in the basement. I gotta go. Nice talking to you.
Take care, bro.